Well, we're here at Mākua, and we're waiting for them to let us get on board. Apparently, I'm not on the list, and it's like I'm the first time visitor to Mākua. And the boss is saying that because I'm not on the list, I can't go in. This is a cultural access organized by Mālama Mākua. So I don't quite get their problem. So the cultural sensitivity with the Army has definitely taken a whack today. And what's happening, the last access, Leandra wasn't allowed access because she didn't have covered footwear. And then one of our agreements in court was that the cultural access could allow for no covered shoes for specific areas on Mākua where we would normally go to. So the top-down information, stuff coming from the Pentagon to the generals, to the colonels, to the majors, to the sergeants, to the staff on the ground, kind of lacking. So I'm really concerned that they haven't quite figured out since 2001, after the initial agreement, they haven't quite figured out how to communicate from the bosses down to the staff guys. So right now we're waiting in the parking lot, waiting to get in, waiting for our access, because they can't figure it out. And the boss right now, Stephanie, said that I can't go in. But anyway, we'll keep you informed. We're going to be doing more Mākua updates coming shortly. So did you want to talk to me at all on camera? No. How come I'm being denied to go in?
You're not on the list.
But we've worked this stuff out before, and your supervisor is who? Who's your supervisor?
Mr. Tori.
Who?
Mr. Tori.
Mr. Tori.
Right.
And who's his supervisor?
Mr. Garo.
And who's his supervisor?
Mr. Len Halsey.
So where does General fit into all of this? And the agreement that we made with the Army at the Pentagon to access and work out things at this level.
I already told you my supervisor that in right here.
Okay, so are they coming down?
No.
No. So they're actually denying our access today.
No. Your access is not denied. You are not on the list.
I've been on the list from the time we made the agreement.
No.
The agreements that we signed with Mālama Mākua is for access.
Right here, Sparky, okay?
Okay.
Index it right here.
Well, you tell your boss that we'll be expecting an apology for denying our access.
No. We are not denying your access.
You are. We're out here.
You are not on the list. Like I told Dr. the group can go.
The 7 of us.
The group can go.
Is that a problem? 7 of us.
No. The group can go. All right? Okay, thank you.
Basically, you're denying our access. Thank you.
No.
When Stephanie got introduced to us, when she first came, I don't know who was here. Leandra was here, and Shawana. She was introduced as the replacement for Major Corpus.
Why the hell isn't she here?
And she was the new officer in charge. And the next thing we know, she's telling me that she's on the committee, but that Bert, or the range officer, would be the officer in charge. So I got a feeling she felt a little uncomfortable. She felt very uncomfortable.
In the transition from one person to the other, they're not getting everybody up to date on the information or what's appropriate. Because last time, Leandra was denied access because they didn't have the current forms that was agreed on.
Yeah, they didn't have the agreement. They claimed they didn't have the agreement.
Amendment to the settlement agreement, which allows us to not have shoes in these pre-approved areas. And the area which she was in was, of course, pre-approved.
Yeah.
I was on the tarmac.
What was the date? I gave you the forms. What was the date of the agreement?
December 2008.
So it's not like it was only yesterday and they couldn't.
Oh, no.
Maybe their mail is really slow.
Somebody must have gotten it because Major Corpus knew about it. Laurie Lucking knew about it. Alton Exabi and Carly Antone knew about it. So the people who used to be in charge knew about it. But then there's this changeover, and we've unfortunately had this before, where new people come in and they don't know the history.
Yeah.
And for some reason, they either have it and haven't read it, or maybe they didn't get it. I don't know.
Or just this is his first day out here either, right? I mean, he's been here for a couple of years.
He's been here, but he hasn't been OIC. He hasn't been officer in charge.
But he's been here, so he's been exposed to times that people weren't on the list and allowed to ask.
Well, he should have been. I'm not sure how directly that was, William, because Major Corpus at least had, could make decisions. He wasn't afraid to make decisions. It's not like the exceptions haven't been made in the past. They have.
Well, Sparky's not just like Mr. Joe Public to the Army. Sparky is president of Mālama Mākua. They all know him. Or maybe that's why.
Well, I don't know. I'm guessing it feels like retaliation, and
or incompetence.
well, I guess either one doesn't matter. Both extreme conditions. It's unfortunate that the Army is taking this position. This is the Cultural Access Day, and it shows their lack of cultural sensitivity, and for the importance of going in. But we're going to be outside the gate. Now they have no control. They have no ability to observe, participate, or even experience. So 7 people. I guess the 7th one was too much for them.
I guess so. It must have been too much of a burden to provide security for a 7th person.
Yeah. And I guess what they're trying to do is really force the issue about having everybody on the list. And I know we've worked that in the past, even in the agreement, that there wouldn't be any unreasonable, we'd be able to work things out, discuss it, talk it out. And this time it was just unfortunate. But in the meantime, what's the other update from Mākua, from Mālama Mākua?
There's a lawsuit that challenges the Army, the Army has submitted what they think is the final EIS. They've sent it in for record of decision, which has been approved, and that if it goes unchallenged, would allow them to train. So our position is that they have not completed the marine studies. They have not done an adequate subsurface archaeological testing, and we have experts who will back that up. And so if the EIS isn't complete, they should complete it if they want to go back to training. So there's a lawsuit been submitted. We don't have a date yet, but we did find out that the Army doesn't plan to do live fire training before November 1st.
Tad Davis came to Waianae and did a presentation, and the cameras were denied at that meeting as he was doing his presentation on the ocean dumping. And I thought it was unusual that my question was, what are they hiding? The meeting was held at Kamehameha School's auditorium, and in that agreement, there's no videotaping on campus. So my question is, why are they having meetings that videotaping has not been arranged? And I've talked to other producers in Waianae, and videotaping at that location has always been denied. But I also understand that if you make arrangements with them, it's acceptable. Leandra, you was the one that went, and you were denied. So a lot of denial lately, but what's happening? What was the story about that?
Actually, it wasn't Tad Davis's group. It was Joe Jordan, and she was quite apologetic for not even considering that we would bring cameras, because we always bring cameras, but for that moment you know what she told me? She said, in the past, the neighborhood Nanakuli group and Tad Davis's group, this was the first convenient time for the Nanakuli group to merge with the Waianae group, and in the past, Tad Davis's company was really comfortable at that location because of the AC, and I got pretty upset. I thought that comfortability should be for the residents of Waianae, not necessarily for the people who are hurting our aina, and then later on try to help it. I just thought that information should have been given to the public.
That's kind of what's happening here. There's it's set up. They're doing it for Tad Davis' comfort, so it can be cool, but the information stops there. So if you didn't attend it, you don't know what's happening. So again, denying access to there would be information to it. So William, you got anything about that meeting? Because I think you attended as well.
Well, I think the information that was presented at that meeting certainly would have been helpful for the community.
Oh yeah.
It was. I think it was covered pretty decently by the print media. Serves as a lesson to us to not assume that we're going to be welcomed with open arms every place that we go. So to do our homework ahead of time and make sure that we contact the proper people ahead of time to make sure that the ability to videotape and share the information with the broader public is always available. In this case, yes, clearly, your name wasn't on the list, but in terms of past practices, the majority of the time, even though people have not been on the list, when we've had larger groups, much larger groups, the people whose name were not on the list were allowed to access. So clearly, somebody is either afraid to make a decision at this lower level, or the right person who should have been here with that authority to make the decision wasn't here today. So I think both sides bear some responsibility, but I think the majority of the responsibility really belongs to the Army in terms of it not being flexible enough to account for something that's been going on since 2000. Here we are almost 9 years later. And we've made it very clear, even though the settlement agreement says that we're supposed to notify them, Fred, we've always told them from the very beginning that when we put out the kahea, we don't always have the ability to know who's coming ahead of time, and that it is improper cultural protocol to turn people away. And Borge said that he's not denying us cultural access. That's not true. They are denying us cultural access because of our reliance on past practices, our reliance on a cultural understanding of the process, and obviously today no one had a cultural understanding of the process. They relied on the legalese, and if we were to rely on the legalese, then of course we would have had a case last week when Leandra was denied access because Borge didn't do his homework and he didn't get the most up-to-date information on what was possible and what was not possible, and made a critical mistake in not allowing Leandra to access simply because she didn't have shoes. So it kind of shows that there's some level of incompetence here, as well as incompetence, I think, in terms of management.
We were flexible 8 days ago in not pursuing the legal agreement that would have allowed Leandra to access. And it's just too bad that that same flexibility wasn't here today.
I think Mālama Mākua has been very flexible when the Army needed to do things that weren't in the agreement but were reasonable.
Yeah.
Mālama Mākua has always acted in a responsible way, acknowledged that, and allowed these things to happen, even though it didn't have to. And here we have a prime example of not having the right personnel here to make a reasonable decision. Sparky, you're one guy. You made the group go from 6 to 7. They had two cultural resources people here. They had a DEI guy. They had at least 2 or 3 range guys. So the ratio of military personnel to cultural access people was pretty close. It's not like there was 1 to 50. I think we clearly have demonstrated over the past 10, 15 years that when we come for cultural accesses, it's about the culture. It's about sharing. It's about making ho'okupu. It's about honoring the ancestors that are here, and that we're not here to play, that we're not here to run around unchecked, that we have always remained focused and we've always conducted ourselves as culturally appropriate. And so from a decision-making standpoint, we have a person that's in charge of a range who does not feel that he's empowered to make a common sense decision. That's a fundamental flaw in this process. And then I think we have a person that's supposed to be assigned to us who's been tasked someplace else, and there's a wahine, I've never met her, Stephanie something. Yeah, well, she was supposed to be here today to solve these kinds of problems.
In the past, whenever we have a meeting, they've got briefings, they've got debriefings, they make sure that there's a lot of discussion to avoid situations like this. And here we are, and it appears that the briefing either didn't stick or was never made, or was done so casually that it assumed that they knew all of the different things that they would be responsible for. And they assume, or maybe I assumed foolishly, that they would be culturally aware of what today meant, or the accesses meant.
I mean, the problem is even simple. If Borge doesn't feel that he can make the decision, and this Wahine Stephanie doesn't feel that she can make a decision, even though the person that she's replacing has made this decision many times over, they should have had direct control to somebody who could have made the decision. And because they don't, or because they are unwilling to, that's why we're sitting outside here now and not conducting the cultural access inside.
Yeah. And this is one of the points that the judge had made, that we don't have the same access that they do to the sites. And our goal was to increase the amount of sites that could be accessed. Was that the Preservation Council that we went to? They said that our walking by the sites may cause more damage. But the troops running by and the howitzers going off and the rotor wash from the helicopters was okay. And
ouch!
There's a lot of things going on that seems to be so subtle, but cumulative. For me, it has huge impacts, and this is one of the examples of that kind of result.
Right. So you're being denied cultural access. Us being denied cultural access today is a result of that. It's either incompetence or it's a conspiracy. So
yeah,
incompetence, conspiracy, one of the two. Take your choices. The whole kupu that was brought today, of course, is some lei and the puolu and the kahili. The lei, the pikaki lei, was actually brought for in memory of Mokihana.
Yes.
And there was some discussion that we had earlier about whether or not we should have placed the lei on the ahu or not, and then come out here. And knowing the spirit of Mokihana and knowing that her dedication and beliefs in the cause for Mālama Mākua, we had that short discussion and said, well, what would Mokihana have done? I think Mokihana would have joined us here outside the fence.
Yeah.
Presentation of ho'okupu, we can't make it inside, we make it at the gate because we need to fulfill our cultural responsibilities. The fact that the Army does not let us today go and do it on the ahu, which is about 150 yards in, really is heva. And, I can't talk for their decision-making process other than to say that it's ridiculous.
Mokihana Kiotani was one of our board members. She came on at the beginning of Mālama Mākua because she had her heart and soul in the Aina. She worked at that time on the Waianae Coast as a school counselor. Even after she was transferred to Outer Islands, she still maintained her membership in Mālama Mākua and contributed greatly. Unfortunately, she succumbed to a long battle with cancer and died about 2 weeks ago. So we'll really miss her. She was an exceptional person.
When you add the cumulative impacts of all of these, either conspiracies or incompetencies, it just makes the relationship with the Army more frustrating. And the ability to focus and have a cultural access, it makes it much more difficult. Yeah? I mean, how many times have I been told that we can make ho'okupu at Site 4546 get here and then be denied? I mean, that's another example of how either incompetence or, like I said, some sort of institutional conspiracy manifests itself here. It's real inconsistent.
Yeah. Well, they also told you that you couldn't put it here. You can put it there.
You can put it only at the back of the church instead of inside the middle of the church.
Yeah. So they decide how practice looks, how it feels, how it's practiced. And
they're trying. I mean, we refuse to do that. We're not going to put it at the back of the church because it's clearly the most inappropriate place to put it. Yeah. Well, one more obstacle in the struggle. Yeah. And we're not going to go away.
Yeah. And outside the fence is okay. We get to tell our story anyway. They don't control the message. They never will. And they try all the time. So this is part of their good neighbor policy. Sucks. I've heard you say a lot that the Army has failed in this and failed in that. And this is one of the huge, massive failures that they perpetrated on Mākua as well as on all the people.
Yeah. A failure to apply common sense.
For clarification, Hui Mālama Mākua, can you share a little bit about who they are?
Sure.
Yeah.
Hui Mālama Mākua is a group of cultural practitioners that are closely associated with Mālama Mākua, and actually Mālama Mākua members are also part of the Hui. And our task or mission statement is to continue the cultural practices of our kupuna in Mākua and to demonstrate kuleana by conducting cultural protocols, by living Hawaiian in a place where Hawaiians are no longer allowed to live, and to act as a cultural conscience for both groups, for the Army, for the community in Waianae, and for the community as a whole. We remind institutions, the Army institutions, government institutions, we remind them that Hawaiians not only used to do, that Hawaiians continue to do cultural practices, such as presenting a ho'okupu, makahiki, hula in Mākua, uli in Mākua, caring for some of the sacred sites, Mo'opuna Wai, the well near the mango tree, the ahu that have been built that aren't officially recognized by institutions but are recognized by Native Hawaiians.
What about Uncle Ivanhoe? Because he's kind of the guy that got me involved. Marion Kelly talking about Ivanhoe Naivi and showing his picture holding the water in a spring that was
later buried.
We didn't even know existed. And showing us the bullet holes where he's buried in the graveyard.
I guess Uncle Ivanhoe is sort of the manifestation of all of the heva that was created in 1941, after 1941, 1942, when the military in Hawaii took the opportunity of the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor to declare martial law, which was later determined to be illegal, they declared. But at the same time, allowed them to grab large tracts of land in Hawaii for, quote, military purposes. And of course, we're here where the Army took something like 4,000 plus acres. And it wasn't that the land was unsettled or that there wasn't anybody living there. There were families living here in Mākua, And so for Uncle Ivanhoe and probably about 27 other families at least, they were given basically an eviction notice. Evicted, I think a better word, evicted from this land. But 6 months after the war, you can come back.
And that was all Kuleana land you're talking about.
This was actually fee simple land that they had gained through either purchase or, in many cases, the families here through land commission awards or royal patents. And it wasn't like you have a choice. It wasn't like, do you want to sell your land to us? It was, get out. We'll figure out what the correct value of the land is, and we're going to give that money to you, and you don't have a choice. In fact, Uncle Ivanhoe and his family were well documented. They were by Mary and Kelly that they were actually evicted at gunpoint because they didn't want the money and they didn't want to leave. So Uncle Ivanhoe's legacy to us is two things. One, to get the Army to live up to its promise that those families can return 6 months after the war, now 60 plus years after the war. And two, to demonstrate Kuleana by caring for and rehabilitating the Aina for all of the heva that has been done to it. So it's a two-tiered process, and we have a plan. When the Army is ready to leave, as it shall be shortly, these three valleys behind us will be turned into a learning institution on how to rehabilitate military lands that have been bombed and dumped on for 60 plus years, and how to bring life and how to bring skills to our community and make jobs and become an economic engine for our community, because what better way to demonstrate Kuleana than to take all its negative and turn it into a positive?
Well, I guess they're consistent. They were denied Uncle Ivanhoe. They denied us. So the denial of access to Mākua is, no matter what they promise, no matter what they say.
But what they don't count on is the understanding and the demonstration of Kuleana on a generational basis. Mm-hmm. So we've been here for probably 15, 18 years. Uncle Ivanhoe's been here fighting for since 1941, 60 plus years later on. This is a second generation fight that we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Many of our children are being trained right now for the third generation, either fight or rehabilitation. So that's what I think, that's the advantage that we have. We have long memories. We have connection to the place. We have accepted and clearly demonstrated this continuing Kuleana. But there's a difference between our groups and other groups along the coast who do a lot of talking but very little doing. And the responsibility, the Kuleana, goes to the people who have actually been doing the work on the land. That's the people who are recognized. So we're seeing a community acceptance of the recognition of Mālama Mākua and the Hui as being the folks who have demonstrated Kuleana to manage this land.
Now, a person I talked to a while back said, why would you want to try and get this place to clean it up? I mean, it's never going to happen. And my response was, it's never going to happen in my lifetime. But in maybe 7 generations, if we keep on, planting, cleaning.
Well, we got to define never, yeah? What is never?
Well, it seems so overwhelming with all the unexploded ordnance,
maybe never
contamination.
means in their time.
Well, we have clear examples of where never is never the right answer. We have Japan, we have Germany, we have England, we have France, we have places where munitions in volumes way more than this have been dumped upon it. And the people didn't leave those areas. I mean, they continue to live in those areas. They continue to farm. They continue to construct. They continue to build. And they develop procedures. And those procedures are in place so that if the farmer comes by and is plowing his field and he hits something metal and he gets off his tractor, he verifies that it's ammunition. Then he calls a government agency and they send out a bunch of guys and they, you know, depending on the size of the munition, create a buffer zone around it and then decide to deal with it in place or to take it someplace else to deal with it. So history has provided us with the answer to never.
Yeah. Well, that hasn't happened here though, because I remember there was some munitions found in Anakuli that was wartime. Apparently fell off the train or something, and then everybody put up their hands and said, "Oh, that's not ours." Assuming like they didn't want to take responsibility for cleaning it up, and some private organization came in and did it. Yeah. But I was really shocked that the Army or the Navy, which is the primary transport for munitions out of Waianae and Lulule, denied.
That's the difference in our plan. See, our plan is we're not going to call on the Army to deal with the bombs that we find over here. We're going to train our own people to deal with the bombs that we find over here. And we're not going to have a 5-year plan like they did with Kaho'olawe. We're going to have a 5-generation plan because that's about the right amount of time that it takes to clear 60 years of heva, of dropping bombs, of disposing of things in this valley. So, you know, 150 years, 5 generations, that sounds appropriate to me. That's the kind of culturally appropriate planning to do. You know, it's not tied to a 5-year plan. Now, many people are going to ask, well, how do you intend to do this? Where are you going to get your money from? Well, we're going to make a very strong case that the money that the Army would have allocated to do the cleanup, which they're legally responsible for, and morally responsible for, and some would say spiritually responsible for, we would like that money given to a non-profit group that's going to manage Mākua, and then the proceeds from that endowment then would be used for the operating costs, and then we can look at using the expertise gained here as sort of income generating potential to be reinvested in the cleanup of Mākua. So it's about Mākua and it's not about the individuals. Yeah? I mean, we've always said that it's all about Mākua and it's not about any one of us individually. And so that's going to continue to be the foundational statement which drives Mākua in 2019. Yeah. I mean, there'll be people here. Hopefully, they'll be sitting inside in some nicer surroundings than on the side of the road, and they'll be discussing on the next project that they're going to take on. Okay, well, which 100 acres are we going to focus on now? And they're going to decide that they're going to have some papaya watermelon salad that is growing just behind the petroglyph rock, and they're going to have that along with some dried akuli that was caught offshore here. And so this is our vision for the future.
Yeah. Definitely a Ahopua Learning Center.
One that is tweaky.
One that's based on the demonstration of kuleana. Because I hear a lot of people talk about kuleana, but I see very few people demonstrating it, such as we've done for the last 12 years here, and not just here, in many other places. Fred is treated.
And you know what's really, in my mind, unfortunate? We've talked to generals, colonels, all kinds of people from the military, from government, and an agreement we make with one doesn't mean that it's going to be carried through to the next one. Right. Next person comes in, you got to renegotiate, start all over from scratch.
Except the agreements that you make in court.
Except the one the judge says, this is what you got to do.
Those have withstood the test of changing generals.
Yes. Unfortunately, sometimes the legal avenue is the only way to resolve the issue. Because once the Army had to do certain things, they started keeping their word.
I mean, Mālama Mākua was criticized at the time of signing the settlement.
Yeah.
The settlement has actually turned out to be the strongest lever that Mālama Mākua has in keeping the Army accountable for behaving itself while it conducts activities here, and accountable for providing the cultural accesses, and accountable for providing some future planning. for Mākua. And so, you know, other groups, each situation is different and individual, and you have to take a look at what options are available to you. But as far as the struggle for Mākua as it continues, we're getting a lot of help from the Uhani. And the reason that we're getting a lot of help from the Uhani is because of our demonstration of kuleana and our presentation of Ho'okupu and this tie that we continually renew with the tutus that are still here, who remember the promises, and tutus that were here prior to the army, who remember how sweet the flowers smell, who remember how beautiful the rainbows are, who remember how beautiful the winds sound at certain times.
And it just blew through.
We recognize it's not just us that's doing the pushing. We also recognize that strategically the army is changing, and strategically Mākua is becoming less and less and less important, even though they have to say in the press that it's critical. You notice they always say that it's critical. Kaho'olawe is critical. If we don't have Kaho'olawe, Pearl Harbor is going to empty and nobody's going to be here. And when Kaho'olawe was returned, Kanaloa was returned, guess what? I think Pearl Harbor is actually larger than it was at that time. So the naysayers that are out there that are saying that if the army gives up Mākua, the army is going to leave Hawaii, it's just a smokescreen, because they have no culture on their side. They have no moral connection on their side, and they've clearly demonstrated they have no reason to be here, because they've trained elsewhere for the last 7 years.
Yeah.
So it's not that we're saying something or we're projecting something. It's that they've demonstrated it. They've clearly demonstrated to us that they have the ability to train elsewhere, and that it is time for some serious discussions about how to transition Mākua out of the military hands into civilian hands, to the right civilian hands. Yeah. 'Cause I would hate to see it go to a group that has no connection, that has no investment. It's the work that we've all done, and people that have come along with us have done. It's that work, it's that connection that's allowing the change, the transition, the huli to happen. Yeah. When we during Makahiki talk about Malva does a whole kupu ole that talks about the coming of the Veil. We thought that Veil would come 50 years from when we started, and to come in 5 years, all our hoilona is in place. Yeah. Nobody had seen the Veil in the Veil bloom in probably more than 80 years. And 5 years after we started Makahiki and offering a Veil, here comes its bloom. So when we built the Ahu, the rainbow arching from the ocean to that piece of land where the Ahu is built, the sighting of Kauai, these are all ho'elona that are unmistakably in support.
Mm-hmm. So Jan, any 2 cents on your part as kind of the that you want to share on camera?
Well, I was looking at Leandra's van there, this Endless War bumper sticker, and it occurred to me that all of this exists because a few corporations need profits. They keep the country on a war footing, and they have places like this, not just here, but all over the world. Vieques in Puerto Rico, Diego Garcia, Indian Ocean. So this is part of something bigger, obviously, and it's an indicator of kind of a wrongness in the country, a sickness. We need enemies.
Yeah, I noticed that there's a war college, but there's not a peace college.
Yeah.
Billions spent on that war machine you're talking about, but pennies spent on peace.
Well, when I grew up, it was commies were the enemy, and now it's Arabs or the enemy.
Always have to have that dark shadow.
Well, it justifies, it gets people supporting occupations like this.
So fear works then.
Yeah, it's a fear tactic.
Just take a look at how many vehicles have passed by just in this short time that we've been here. That shows you the amount of use of this area by the residents of Waianae, by the residents of Oahu. Clearly, this type of activity, given all of what you're experiencing in the noise from the vehicles going by, is clearly incompatible.
Yeah.
The time for this stuff is pow.
Well, where Leandra and I live, we're downwinders from Schofield. They fired howitzer rounds over the range and landed in Waianae Valley, we were in that impact zone. The EM radiation coming out of Lulu'ule, we were within that, and you're even closer. The blast radius from all the bunkers, from the munition storage, no evacuation plan. It's huge, and they transport that stuff through Waianae all the time, and it gets to the point where it's almost invisible for us. We don't see it, and even stuff like this. Oh, look at the valley, beautiful valley, but this isn't what it started looking like. This was a dryland forest. The streams are flowing. The natives, birds, animals. I mean, they were here.
Several hundred people in modern times, and probably several thousand people pre-contact living out here.
Yeah.
So the land is the land can be momona aina. It can be, and it can be once again. The sea is certainly momona kai. We have the richest fishing offshore here. So
Maybe it will be that way again. Any last words? I got about a minute on tape.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for listening.
Mahalo. Aloha.
aloha and imua.
Oh, Tutu, tell me where the people going today. Oh, Tutu, tell me where the people going today. They're going down Mākua, bring ho'okupu and pray. They're going down Mākua, bring ho'okupu and pray. Oh, Tutu, please, can you tell me how to go? Oh, Tutu, please, can you tell me how to go? Take my hand and follow, this road is long and slow. Take my hand and follow, this road is long and slow. Tutu, when I get there, oh, what gifts shall I bring? Tutu, when I get there, oh, what gifts shall I bring? Come with aloha aina and the song to sing. Come with aloha aina and the song to sing. Oh, Tutu, wake up, they're burning her tonight. Oh, Tutu, wake up, they're burning her tonight. Oh, call everybody, tell them we must fight. Oh, call everybody and tell them we must fight. Oh, Tutu, show us the pono things to do. Tutu, can you show us the pono things to do? Inui kawai ava ava and it will come to you. Inui kawai ava ava and it will come to you. Oh, Mākua, tell us how to heal your pain. Oh, Mākua, tell us how to heal your pain. Look for the answer in the ulalena rain. You will find the answer in the ulalena rain. He ho'o Mākua, soon you will be free. He ho'o Mākua, soon you will be free. Aina pula pula from the mountains to the sea. Aina lana kila from the mountains to the sea. Aina ika pono from the mountains to the sea. Aina Ikea from the mountains to the sea.